I found that video on YouTube, and it intrigued me because of how he talks about the peace of Christ. He talks about it as comfort, rest, about when we connect with God, we make better choices for our family. We feel safe with Jesus in our life. And he talks about peace in an interesting way, and why it struck me is it seems so juxtaposed to this passage in Luke. And the passage in Luke is to me, one of the more uncomfortable passages of Jesus talking that, and I think at times we gloss over it, because here Jesus is coming out and saying, I'm coming to bring fire. Fire is not a toy you play with. Fire destroys things. It burns things. There's a lot of ways we use fire, and here Jesus is saying, I'm bringing fire. Not only that, he says, I am coming to bring division, not peace. And so I found the juxtaposition of what Jesus is saying here with that video quite fascinating, because the video talked about God comforting, soothing, and making us feel safe. And here Jesus is saying, I'm bringing the fire, and I am bringing division, not peace. And it's an uncomfortable division, and it's a division I think many of us are familiar with. He talks about the division as families being separated, families being not together. Father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. That's not comfortable. That's not something I want to hear Jesus saying. And it makes me struggle. It makes me wonder, what is going on here? What is happening here? I can kind of get the fire thing, that Jesus is coming to bring a fire and can't wait to see it kindled. And part of why I can get it is some of my own experience. You remember back in '89, Yellowstone National Park, one of our largest parks, had a fire that swept through. In fact, what happened is they were doing an intentional burn of part of that park, and then the weather changed, a drought hit, wind blew it out of the controlled area, and it took off and exploded in all different directions, and it ended up burning something like 10,000 acres, which was way beyond what they were initially planning on doing with the burn. And I got to go there. That happened in the summer of '89. I was able to go there camping in '90 after it happened. And it was one of the most haunting experiences that I ever had. And what was haunting about it is the part of the park where I was camping, we could walk to a road, and then there was a stream, and that stream was like a line. And everything on the other side of that stream was black or gray. There was no color. And if you stood in the right spot, you saw this black and gray, and on one of the days the clouds were overcast with this whitish gray, and there was absolutely no color. And then if you got closer to it, you noticed that posted on all the trees on the edge of this was a sign which simply stated, it is a $10,000 fine to step foot onto the burn. And part of what that is after a burn, the ecosystem is incredibly delicate. Animals know to stay away for multiple reasons. One is there's no food. Two, say you're a brown rabbit and you go into a black background, are you hidden or do you stand out? You become eagle dinner. So animals know, and they don't go in. After the burn, they stay out. The only animal that may go through it would be a deer, and they're actually okay because their hoofs drive the nutrients from the burn into the ground. They sort of aerate the ground. But what they found is if a human steps, every step you take into a forest burn like that has the potential to kill something like a 5-foot circular area around everywhere you step. Now what that fire does though is this. It kills everything there, and it will actually heat the ground and will kill off any weak seeds that are in the ground that haven't grown or germinated yet. But what it won't do is healthy seeds that are deep enough that couldn't grow because they couldn't get enough sunlight from the forest will start germinating. And what you get after the fire burn, and it'll take quite a few years, is you get a stronger, richer, healthier forest in the place of that burn, which is why we do in forest intentional burns, because that intentional burn can completely change the forest and rejuvenate it into a fresh new forest. But there's a period of about 3 years where if anyone steps in it, it can wreck whole sections where they walk. So Yellowstone, you were banned, and it was a $10,000 fine if you were caught stepping anywhere in the burn area. We know the same analogy with metal. You take iron ore, a big chunk of iron ore, you throw it in a fire, you heat it up, and you start working off the slag and the impurities until you get this pure metal that can be made into things. So we know fire can be used for good things. But what we usually forget is what has to be destroyed or burned off to get to the good. And that's actually not a comfortable image when you think about it. And so here we have Jesus in this passage, this disturbing passage. He's nearing the end of his ministry and he knows it. He knows his end is coming soon. He's called a group of disciples, and he didn't call the best of the best of the best. He called everyday people like us. He didn't follow the normal rabbinic practice of people proving their excellence and then hand-picking the 1 or 2 people with the most potential out of the best of the best of the best, but instead called fishermen, called tax collectors, called zealots, called everyday common people who had failed to show that they were really good, devout Jews. They may have been faithful Jews, but they were, just barely faithful Jews. And that's what we call to be his disciples. And so he's been ministering with them for almost 3 years. He's trying to instill into them what God is doing and how they're going to play a part in that, and they're not getting it. And he knows the end is near, and he's struggling. And he's really struggling with how do I help them understand what God wants from them, who they are. And out of that struggle comes this passage where Jesus comes along and says, look, I am coming to bring a fire, and I wish it were kindled. And I don't know that his image is fire as in destruction as much as fire as in how do I purify and redirect us back to seeing what God is doing in this world and how we could become a part of that. And when he says, I am not coming here to bring peace, I'm here to bring division, we can hear that, and I think I grew up every time I heard it as just hearing it as Jesus is coming to divide us, and then struggling because everyone in all the churches I was a part of growing up always said, well, the church is a place for family, and here Jesus is saying, guess what? And I think what Jesus is talking about is this reality. And I know this reality. I've seen it in my own family. I've seen it in the extended family and stuff like that. Is that we encounter God, and not everybody responds to God. My grandparents had 7 kids. Well, my grandparents took those kids to church every Sunday. And when those kids became adults, not all 7 of them had anything to do with God. And I think for my grandpa, he struggled with that. I know, especially late in his life, he struggled because he didn't raise any of those 7 kids differently. And some of them responded to God, and some of them didn't. And he always wondered, did he fail? No. I've seen this in different parts of my own family with this struggle. Why does someone respond to God? Why does someone not? I've watched people who have gone through fire and come out of it and find themselves closer to God for what God did or didn't do in that fire. And I've watched people go through fire and come out of it and walk away from God for what God did or didn't do in that fire. And I think part of what Jesus is doing is kind of naming a truth that's uncomfortable, that we don't always respond to God. Or in some moments we do respond to God, in some moments we screw up and we don't. I mean, really, part of what Jesus is struggling with is that Jesus has come to the world because the world is filled with sin. And we miss what he's doing and saying and talking about when we get hung up in thinking that sin is moral behavior. You know, it's like some types of cancer will give you sores. Well, you can put Band-Aids over the sores. Might help the sore, but if you ignore the cancer, you're going to have a problem. And sometimes we think of morality, it's like the sores, and we act as if it's the whole disease. And you start reading through these Gospels over and over again, and you start realizing the sin Jesus died for was not our morality. What he died for was every time we don't become the person God created us to be. Every time we don't live up to the potential God put in us. Every time I get caught thinking about me and not, how am I here for you and those around me? And every time I fail to see the bigger picture, fail to see what is the greater good God could do in and through me, and get focused on what can I get out of the here and now. That's the sin he dies for. And Jesus, I think, is getting frustrated because his disciples are still hung up on how the world works. And I think he can talk about this division that he's bringing because some of us experience God and suddenly get it and realize, holy cow. And it completely changes how we see our life. And that can create tension in our own family, as some see it and some don't. And the tension is not Jesus coming, and I don't think he's describing, I'm coming because I want to rip families apart, as much as Jesus is coming and saying, I'm wanting people to experience as absolutely as fully as possible God in their life, and to become who God sees them capable of being as much as absolutely possible, and that rips families apart. That rips communities apart. Because sometimes we're too scared and we can't let go of stuff we need to let go of. Sometimes we're so scared that we cling to stuff we probably shouldn't cling to. That fire burns away stuff. You can't cling to the fire. It'll burn your hand. Trust me, I've touched fire. It doesn't work. It burns in ways you don't want to get burned. And I don't know that Jesus is trying to be mean and upset. The image seems very different than in the video, talking about feeling safe, feeling comfortable. And I don't know that they're as juxtaposed as I made them sound out to be, or describe them initially, as much as what I hear here when Jesus says, I'm bringing division, not peace, is that he's getting that there are people who are too afraid of God and reject God. You know, the first parable he teaches in all the Gospels, and this is uniform in all four Gospels, is the parable of the sower, where the sower spreads the seed, and some of it dies immediately. Some of it grows really quick, but can't get deep roots, so it gets scorched and withers and dies from the sun. Some grows among weeds and gets strangled, and some finds fertile soil and grows. That's actually not an image of everybody getting God. Quite honestly, it's an image of very few people really understanding God's presence in our lives and in our midst. And so for Jesus to say this is maybe Jesus being a bit realistic, not trying to scare or be negative, but maybe naming a truth that's uncomfortable. And the worst part is the last part where he just freaks out over, you can tell when the storm's coming. I rough enough soccer where I'm starting to recognize, oh, that cloud ain't going to rain on me. That one might. That one might cause lightning, which means the game might get postponed, which means I got to do a makeup game and I don't get paid for tonight. You know, the realistic soccer roughing stuff. We aren't doing this for the love of the game. Well, actually, we're not doing it for the pay because the headache you put up with parents is way greater than the what you get for roughing a game. But last thing we want is to get all ready, come out and rough the game and have it rain it out, so you got to make it up. Anyway, he gets upset because they can see the weather, they can get what's coming. Like good farmers, they really have a feel for the earth, the land, and the things around them. Yet they can't see the contrast between God's presence and our desires. They can't see that contrast between the things of the Spirit and the things of the flesh, as Paul likes to use. I mean, Paul, in this passage, or not Paul, the author of Hebrews has this fascinating line in that passage where he says, let us set aside every sin that clings so closely and try to run the race with perseverance. What a fascinating thing to say. The sin that clings so closely. Not me stealing cookies when I shouldn't steal cookies. Not me speeding when I shouldn't be speeding. Not me doing this to my brother or sister. But that sin that clings where I have an opportunity to make a difference and I let it come by. I have an opportunity to touch someone's life and I ignore it and walk away. And boy, I've had plenty of those situations where someone says something and I could say something really helpful in that moment and I blank and I let the moment pass and go on and then realize afterwards, gosh, God gave me that moment and I screwed it up. You know, that's where I think Jesus is trying to push his disciples to get, is how God is present. Author of Hebrews is getting, and he's not saying it's our job to get everything right all the time, or like even the parable of the scattering of the seeds. We're not the ones who scatter the seeds in that parable. God is. God is the one who grows it. All we're called to do is go reap the harvest. Find where God has already planted and made things ready. But still, that's an expectation of God of us. But here, in this disturbing passage, to me there is still hope, because it's a Jesus who realizes the livingness of God and how God is trying to reconcile this creation to God, including humanity, including the animals, including the plants, including all of this creation, and somehow needs us to be a part of that reconciliation. And he's showing a bit of frustration of us not seeing our place, our role, and what God could do in and through us. And it's not that we, as the author of Hebrews says, are there to always get it right, as much as we're called to continually try. In other words, the forgiveness on the cross tells us, keep trying. You're forgiven. Keep trying. Keep trying to be who God has put the potential in you to be. Keep trying to figure out how to love, care, serve those around you. Keep trying to see the moments in your life where you can make a difference through God's presence. Keep trying to bear witness to God and all